I thought I'd just get 2 lounges. Really, 1 lounge and an open office is what I should have gotten.
Hello all, and thanks for joining. We'll give folks just another minute to turn up here. We are live on YouTube as well. Could I ask someone from the Hypar team to post a tweet about this? I'm going to send this to everyone in the Zoom chat. No beverages, Robert, unfortunately. We would if we could. I know I could use one. No, we're saving that for, actually, we have our official Hypar happy hour right after this. So that'll be the reward for getting done with Hypar Live. But by all means, please feel free to crack open a beer if you're in a time zone that would support such an action. Certainly it's 3 o'clock Friday somewhere.
Love that Andrew's suggesting that people have to drink to enjoy.
I didn't suggest it. It was an attendee in the chat. not my idea.
You're gonna need a stiff drink. You're gonna follow along here, people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me get my screen sharing going. And then we'll probably get started here. And if folks are still trickling in, no big deal, because there's a little bit of a preamble. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, indeed. Looks great.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for coming to Hypar Live. This is a series that we have done. Originally, I think the plan was every 2 weeks, and it fell off for a little bit, but we're trying to pick back up on this. This is a chance to chat with the Hypar team, see what we're up to, see the sort of latest and greatest of our sort of technical developments. And I think, I'm going to start by just giving a little overview of what Hypar is, because having glanced at the attendee list, I think there are a number of folks who are maybe new to these events, but I promise I won't take too long on that. So to introduce Hypar just a little bit, Hypar is a web-based design platform for architecture, engineering, and construction. So what does that mean? It's a place where you can go on the web to design architectural projects. And so that can be, massing or space planning or analysis or construction tools or all sorts of applications, anything having to do with a building or specifically decision-making around buildings can happen on Hypar. So it's a 3D environment, and it's also a sort of a mechanism to execute computational logic. So Hypar is extensible by design. Anyone can build workflows on Hypar, set up a new project, or even build products for other folks to use on Hypar. So the core of this idea is the notion of a function. On Hypar, anyone can author a function, and Hypar is a sort of ecosystem of these functions, some of which are written by the Hypar team, some of which are written by our users. And in Hypar's 3D environment, you can use these functions to start effectively designing your project. So you might establish a site with one function, or grab location information with another function, or start to mass up a building with yet another. And the way that these are set up, they're sort of modular and interchangeable. So if you don't like the strategy for generating an envelope that someone has produced with their function, you can swap it out for a different one. So you can bring in other pieces of logic for any one of the systems or pieces of detail of your project and play around with different design alternatives until you're happy with one that you like. And these functions also talk to each other. So if I have a function that's going to cut some levels and create some floors, it can respond, of course, to the building mass that's being generated. So one of the core ideas of Hypar is enabling creative partnership with automation. and computational intelligence. So I think there are a lot of really great modeling tools out there in the world that let you just sort of like sculpt and design fluidly and freely. And there are also tools that have a lot of intelligence about what a building is and means. And Hypar aims to be the best of both worlds, a place where you can rely on an algorithm to solve some part of a design problem for you. So if I sketch out a building mass, for instance, then the core function is going to suggest a core location. It's going to say, hey, here's a reasonable location where you might put a core. A central core is probably a reasonable assumption for a lot of buildings. But if the algorithm has made a decision that doesn't work for me or my project, I can easily adjust and manipulate and override and correct the decisions that this algorithm has made. So this allows for a kind of creative partnership with the automation tools that live on Hypar. So you can always rely on an automated solution to give you a quick, fast answer. And if it's the wrong answer, you can adjust it or fine tune it or just wipe it out altogether in favor of something better. And so that brings us to today's topic, which is HyparSpace. HyparSpace is a collection of tools for space planning and test fitting built on Hypar, built using all of the same mechanisms I've already talked about. And I think the simplest way to explain HyparSpace is that it lets you do interior space planning, space layouts, test fits, thinking at the level of spaces, not at the level of individual items of furniture. So what that means is if you pick a pair of offices like these, if I click and select these two private offices here in this plan, and I say, actually, I'd like these to be open collaboration space, I can just tell Hypar to change the program assignment for these spaces, and it will recompute the layout accordingly. It will update all of my metrics. It will generate new furniture layouts accordingly. It removes the walls in place of something more open. And these automatic space layouts are dynamic and size aware. So if you split an 8-person conference room into 2, you'll get 2 4-person conference rooms with appropriate furniture layouts as well. And these are all, real products that are tied into BIM data, and they can be brought into Revit as well, which we might talk about a little bit later. Hypar lets you test out alternatives as you're doing these design studies. And because it's as quick as just saying, hey, let's make this thing a lounge, or let's make this thing a pantry, we can test out lots of alternatives, run multiple scenarios, and have a high level of fidelity on those. So maybe I'm test fitting for a law firm, but I also want to see what it would look like to turn this same project into a trading floor. I can just adjust a few of those settings, maybe sketch a different circulation route, pick a few different programs, and I've got a trading floor. Or maybe an insurance office, or maybe a creative workplace that has a lot more like open collaborative spaces integrated into the same plan. And so all of this can happen in the context of the HyparSpace workflow. And in a minute, I'll show you interactively how that actually works. So the billing for today was to talk about the sort of what's new in Hypar as well as what's coming next. So I'm going to start by highlighting a number of new features of both these tools and of Hypar, the platform generally, that are aiming at making these processes of doing sort of quick test fits and space layouts really easy and fast. And then I'm going to give you a sneak peek into some sort of preview workflows that we're working on that expand and extend the HyparSpace capabilities. So one thing I want to highlight is we've just revamped a lot of our documentation. There are a bunch of new tutorials on YouTube that show you the kind of latest and greatest of working with HyparSpace. You can go to our YouTube channel to see these. Maybe some of you are actually tuning in via the live stream on YouTube, so feel free to just browse around to these. And these walk through the entire end-to-end process of taking an existing conditions model from Revit, bringing it into HyparSpace, setting out the layouts that you want, bringing in custom program requirements, sort of fine-tuning and finalizing that layout, and then bringing it back into HyparSpace, or back into Revit. So definitely recommend checking those out. We've also kind of soft launched a new documentation site. So the URL for this might change, but there's already a real wealth of resources specifically around HyparSpace already available on this site, and that's documents.hypar.io. I'll throw this in the chat as well. That's documents.hypar.io. Feel free to check this out. There's a lot of step-by-step documentation about how to work specifically with HyparSpace. This also covers a wider range of start points. So our video tutorials might show you how to start with a model brought in from Revit, but maybe all you have is a scan of a plan or a PDF or a CAD file. This documentation will also point out how to work with that. So that's probably enough preamble and enough slides. I think it would be good to switch over to the actual UI and start highlighting some of the new features that make working with HyparSpace a lot easier. So this is what HyparSpace looks like. For those of you who are new to the Hypar environment, there's effectively a main 3D view, which you can move around in like you would in another 3D application. You can scroll to zoom in and out. You can hold down Shift to click or right click and drag to pan. And you can click and drag to orbit around the model. If you prefer orthographic or plan views, you can switch using the view tools over here. So oftentimes I'll work in like a plan view. And one of the new features that we released just yesterday, in fact, that I'm really excited about. This has been a bunch of work by a bunch of team members, but especially Serena Lee and Kate Hriharenko have been working on this functionality. It's super amazing. Before, if you wanted to change a space here in the layout, you would have to go over to space planning zones, go find the override, we call it, which will allow you to kind of select something to change. But now it's much easier than that. All you have to do is click. And so maybe I want to turn this into a classroom. All I have to do is pick classroom from this drop-down menu and hit save. And it will recompute that layout. It will assign this program to be a classroom. It will update all of my metrics. It will calculate a new furniture layout. It will generate the walls, all of that just by virtue of that one interaction. And so I think this is really exciting for HyparSpace, and it's really exciting for Hypar in general. We're making it easier to build tools that work this way with kind of direct select interaction, direct modeling, so that you can spend more time over here designing in the 3D view and less time worrying about the sort of parameters and controls and the jet fighter cockpit, as we sometimes jokingly refer to it, of all of the possible controls that are available over here. In fact, it's quite possible to work with HyparSpace these days with very little of that. You can just sort of click around and adjust and get a lot of effective work done.
Andrew, can I jump in with just one little comment here? Because I don't want it to be missed. The kind of importance of the evolution of what you're showing here. Those of you who have been following along with Hypar for a long time probably have heard us talk about how we were trying to simplify the very complicated interfaces that are currently available in tools like Grasshopper and Dynamo, which make programming easier. But even for a lot of people, they open that up and they're like, what's all this nodes and wires and everything else? So the workflow bar there over to the left was an initial attempt to sort of do what most people were doing in those kinds of programming patterns inside their inside the firms that they were working at, where they had a bunch of inputs and those inputs generated something, and then you had a bunch of visual outputs. This is taking it even one step further. What if you could embed that functionality such that right down at the level of the thing that was generated by the script, like Andrew is showing, you can grab onto it, and then the inputs that created that thing just present themselves to you. You don't have to go hunting around from. You don't have to pan your Dynamo script or your Grasshopper script and look around like, oh, where's the slider that set this value, whatever. Everything is just like right underneath your fingertips. So this is a kind of an evolution that's going to happen. And like Andrew said, over time, you're going to be less and less dependent on that workflow menu over there, which has all of the settings in it. And you're really only going to pull up the very smallest bits of what you need as you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the other things that are nice about this functionality, it's now much easier to zoom to a specific thing. So you can use the zoom button, or you can select all. If we go into perspective and zoom in on this same space, We can also get in here. If I'm trying to click something, I can hit tab to cycle through to different elements, which will allow me to do things like adjust the furniture locations. So let's say I'm not super happy with this pantry layout and I want to take this table and maybe space it out from the others a little bit. I can now drag this and get real-time feedback and sort of see what that layout is going to look like before. And, I think still a little bit, but we're working to make this feel more and more kind of real time. You might have to wait for a recomputation in order to see what a modified layout looks like. Now you can actually just drag these things around, see what that will look like, and save that as a sort of changed representation. Another really exciting feature that I think is going to help Hypar, the platform in general, not just the HyparSpace workflow, but it's particularly useful here, is the ability to draw precisely. So if I'm starting a new HyparSpace workflow from scratch using one of our templates, and I should show actually, maybe before we dive into that, I'll show you how to create one of these yourself from scratch. If you log into Hypar with a free account, you can click New Workflow, and then go looking for the HyparSpace template. And there are a few of these. There's one that's based on importing models from Rhino, one that's based on importing models from Revit, and one that allows you to kind of draw or sketch, including maybe using an image or a CAD file as a reference. So if I just click New HyparSpace here, I have my instructions that will sort of guide me how to use the workflow, which for now I'll close. And I can just sort of draw a floor plate that I want to start test fitting on. So we'll give this a second to load. I have no floor. I have nothing to start with, but I need to draw one. So I'm going to go to Floors, click Add Floor, and draw Polygon. And then this is going to allow me to basically sketch out a floor plan. And I might want to do this in top view. And before, doing this could be a little bit difficult. But now you have the ability to type specific coordinates. So if I want this to be at precisely 10 meters, I can type that and hit enter, and it will place a point at that exact location. If I hold down shift, I can lock to ortho. I can type specific dimensions here. So I can make this maybe 30 meters and it will lock in that direction. If I just type and don't hit enter, so let's say we'll go to I don't know, let's say 20 meters in this direction, it will sort of constrain that dimension, but not the orientation. So I can sort of hone in on the specific dimension that I need, and then continue to sketch around. So that's one component of enabling better precision drawing. And, as you might expect for for any sort of 3D application, you're also going to want to be able to snap to other geometries. So right now, this core is way too big. So again, taking advantage of this new direct selection capability and the sort of override capability associated with that, I can click Edit Core, and then I can start to make adjustments to this geometry. And you'll see that that's now snapping. Before you had to kind of eyeball a little bit. And now if I want to move this exactly into the corner of the floor, I can snap to the existing geometry, and I can get much more precise about the way that I'm drawing and modeling in this environment. I think this is a little bit of an older update, but some of you may not have seen. By default, Hypar tries to guess what a reasonable circulation path might look like, but now you can also switch that to manual. Again, this is about sort of enabling an interaction back and forth between the sort of the machine and the human designer. So if I want to get in here and start drawing my own idea for what the circulation should look like here, I can sort of sketch that out. I can adjust the size here. Maybe I'll make that 1.5 meters, and I'll hit save, and it will recompute the spaces around this. And so now I can start to, drop in or assign spaces here. I think many of you will already have seen this, but you can also, it used to be that you had to sort of click individual points, but now this is handled via a sort of dynamic automatically perpendicular splitting interaction. So I can just get in here and kind of carve up this space as necessary. And then I can take each of those sort of split areas and start assigning them program. So if I want this to be a little meeting room, I can just set that as such. One other new piece of functionality, which is this one is reserved for pro customers, I think, but it's incredibly useful when you're doing like a lot of test fits that you want to show potentially for a project, is the snapshots functionality. So anytime you want to sort of save a state in your active model, so this is that example I was showing earlier where I've got sort of a creative floor plan. I've just saved that as a snapshot. I can come back to that anytime I want. This is my creative office snapshot. But if I want to show off or compare that with the metrics associated with one of these other sort of work styles or you know, a different sort of tenant profile, I can switch to a different layout. So I'll switch this over to my trading floor and it will recompute the whole model using those saved settings. So this allows you to, in one project, kind of save a number of possible arrangements and settings and return to them and compare them as you need to. Another piece of functionality we're pretty excited about is the ability to bring in your own set of program requirements. So if I have, you know, maybe a complex program that I've set up and I've got that in Excel somewhere, I can bring that in directly. I can either input it myself. So I can say, you know, here's my first department and I'm going to have, you know, space type 1 and space type 2. But of course, entering all of that in the Hypar UI may be okay for a few of these, but oftentimes we'll just want to work in like a tabular data form, or we already have this stuff loaded up somewhere in Excel. So we can download a CSV directly from this in order to get the appropriate format. And then we can open this up in Excel or another spreadsheet editor, and then you can go ahead and manipulate this directly. So if I just sort of fill in the program names and colors and space counts that I require, and specifically the sort of area requirements for each of those, then those will become the basis for my kind of area metrics. So let's go ahead and load in a program here. So let's grab this one. So here I've got a set of program that I want to place. I have to draw a floor here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say, let's make this, I don't know, let's say 150 feet. And oh, that looks like 150 meters, maybe. I think we went a little too far. Draw this out and we'll hit save. And then I can start to place these. And this works too if you have other sort of program names. Maybe you don't use the same terminology that HyparSpace does built in, no problem. Maybe you want to call open office benching. Maybe you want to call your meeting rooms conference rooms. And maybe you want to break them up. Maybe there are a few different types of conference rooms. You can now load in all of that detail and have the sort of spaces react accordingly. So now whatever I specified here, like benching, becomes an option that I can select in this menu. And in fact, I can even set benching to be the default space type for this plan. Benching. And then it will apply it everywhere. And then I can just get in and sort of assign the other spaces that I need. And because I specified area requirements here, now this set of area requirements probably isn't tallying up to the area of this plan. I drew a pretty big floor, but over here I get an area tally. So if I pull this open, I can see what my targets were for area for this program, and I can see where I am in relation to that. So I'm way over, of course, for this area target because this is such a large plan, but this allows you to kind of keep track of what your requirements are and see how you're doing against them live as you're editing your plan. A nuance here that I sort of glossed over is the ability to have these live in groups. So I can group programs now. I can set up different groups for different departments. You know, for office, this may be fairly straightforward, but for more complex programs like, you know, schools or, you know, corporate offices or healthcare, you might have a lot of different departments or groupings that you need to keep track of. And now you can load those into your program requirements as well. And we're actively working on improving the functionality around that too. So I think that pretty much covers the sort of new and available today portion of the workflow. I also wanted to spend some time and focus on some of the stuff we've been kind of cooking up in, you know, in sort of Hypar labs, if you want to call it that. So, you know, one thing we've heard from a lot of the customers we've talked to is that you don't necessarily want to kind of draw out circulation and then just kind of carve up an existing space. Maybe you want to kind of start with spaces that need to be a given size and move them into the right arrangement. So this is a version of the workflow we're calling inside out HyparSpace. And I think eventually this will just be folded into all of the same functionality, which allows you to input a program like the one we just saw. And in fact, this one is a quite complex program loaded in with a number of different departments with their area requirements. And, you know, if I'm over here and I say I want maybe 3 of these, then it will generate 3 of them that I have to place. And then I can interactively move these around and arrange them in something more sensible. And then maybe I can start to sketch out around that. And you can even do this without a starting plan. This is just a project I brought in for Revit, but you can do this with a sort of tabula rasa and start maybe carving a building design around the program that you've established. So if I click any one of these and choose arrange spaces, I can just start dragging these in. So I can move these into place. I can place them in a reasonable arrangement. I can play around with different departments together. I can select multiple at once and kind of move them around, get that live preview about how they're being arranged, and quickly come to a kind of sketchy bubble diagram style layout. And inevitably, you know, the exact shape of the plan, which, you know, is just using a sort of default aspect ratio, may not be the exact shape and size that you need for this space. So once you've brought it into a real context and you want to start manipulating it, you can also edit the specific boundaries. So maybe I want to get into a little more detail and I want to snap this specifically to this edge, and I need to stretch it a little bit beyond what the specified area was for this thing to work. So you can kind of drill down in progressive amounts of detail and start sort of shaping space from the inside out rather than necessarily carving up an existing space. So that's something we're excited to continue to develop. We're also really open to feedback about this. We would love your thoughts on how to make this even better, what sorts of functions you would want to see in order to support a workflow like this, where you were sort of starting from a program and figuring out how the arrangement works without maybe a preconceived floor that you were trying to fit stuff into. There was a question if we can do different shapes. And yes, when I go to mass boundaries here, I can change this to whatever shape I need it to be. Currently, by default, it's going to generate rectangles as the sort of starting condition. But there's nothing preventing you from introducing other shapes as you kind of fine tune the layout and get things worked out. Another pretty exciting example, which we've just begun work on, is the ability to sort of automatically lay out spaces on a floor. So in this case, I've got my program requirements established, and I've only got a few things above and beyond the kind of primary open office space type. And so right now I'm telling it to place 5 of these private offices, but if I decide I want 6, it will actually recompute a layout and find a place to put that 6th private office. So we can actually start reacting to the program requirements to give you a kind of a starting point for your space layout. And you can just sort of interactively start adding new space types here. So maybe I want to introduce, let's see, yeah, let's do some meeting rooms. So maybe I need some meeting rooms, and I need each of those to be 200 square feet, and I need 4 of them. And I want them to be treated by HyparSpace as meeting rooms. And all that this means is that the function that handles laying out furniture should respect that these are meant to be understood as meeting rooms. So it'll try and lay out a sort of meeting room layout in each of those. So now it's managed to place 4 of these meeting rooms, and we'll get, you know, our area tally should match with what we have set up as our requirements. Now, there's a lot more we can do here. This is just the beginning. One thing we can do is start to specify adjacency requirements. This isn't working yet. I actually started working on it over the last couple of days. But if you wanted to specify that the pantry and the lounge should be near to each other, you should be able to specify that using a kind of a common adjacency matrix. Right now, it won't do that because it's not paying any attention to that information. But that, I think, should come fairly soon. Is the ability to kind of specify requirements for each of these spaces in their relation to each other and have those be placed automatically or sort of solved automatically to the best of the sort of algorithm's ability. And again, this doesn't prevent you from getting in and making manual adjustments too. So if I manually want to introduce a classroom here, I can do that too. And it will add that just like the sort of existing workflow. So this can be a sort of partially automatic and partially manual process. I think this idea of kind of working back and forth between sort of automatic solutions and manual solutions is really what makes this kind of thing powerful. There was a question about whether or not this automation could be used in combination with a program that has been manually laid out. And the answer is yes. So when I was doing this example, I just happened to be working with spaces that don't have corresponding space types here where we know sort of what the furniture layouts should look like. But if my program specified those mappings, or if we built out new functions that knew how to lay out a medication storage or whatever. So actually, like reception is probably a good example. That's something where, you know, reception might look not dissimilar from a reception desk in an office. And so as long as I tell HyparSpace what space type it's meant to treat this as, then it should actually lay out the furniture automation as well. So we should see furniture show up here as long as I've got the corresponding reception layout program. And so yeah, now it's dropping in a reception desk to that space. Returning to this one of the things that's cool about this is that you can start to play with the settings that drive the sort of automatic circulation. So let's say, you know, right now I've got basically 23 feet from the corridor to the glazing. If I wanted to bump this up to, I don't know, let's say 30 feet, it will do its best to preserve all of the decisions that I've already made and figure out, recompute the layout with a new circulation path here. So you can start to play around with different alternatives and even say, I don't know what the right depth should be. It's probably going to be somewhere between, I don't know, 15 feet and probably 30 feet at the max. And so I can sort of define a range and have Hypar run a study for me. This too, I think, is a feature for pro users. But the ability to kind of run a bunch of studies in parallel and then see how those work out from the space layout. So we can see how the automated space layout is handling these different depths and reallocating spaces according to what space is available. So that was a pretty whirlwind tour. I think I'd like to open it up for questions generally, and maybe we can sort of move on to a little more free-form discussion about how you would see using something like this in your practice. What sorts of functionality would you like to see in order to make that possible? And, you know, just other sorts of things that these workflows are making you think of. One question from Kristen Forward: what if you wanted to manipulate the shape and rotation of an entire program group, like rotating all patient rooms at a certain angle relative to a circulation corridor? So the spaces should adapt to the circulation layout automatically. So if I'm over here and I switch to a kind of manual circulation and start drawing out a little like loop here where I have maybe some angles, let's say. And this is going to do something crazy because those spaces are not carved up yet. But once I do that, then the spaces that come out should respond to that orientation of that corridor. So the space shapes should actually react to the geometry of specific circulation. If we're talking about this workflow, I think, yes, we'll absolutely need the ability to like select multiple of these and sort of transform and rotate them all at once. We don't have that quite yet, but I think better controls, direct manipulation tools and transform tools like, a classic gumball or something along those lines is probably in our future. There was another question: can the HyparSpace type layouts be edited? And this is a great question. So currently, in order to create a space type layout, you have to write a function, which is effectively a piece of C# code. However, we do support custom space types written as Grasshopper scripts, and we're also thinking a lot about how to support contributing your own space types. So you shouldn't have to write any code to come up with your own space type for a workflow like this. It should be as simple as maybe grabbing some content, a set of furniture families in Revit or pulled out of another platform, and load those in, kind of set up a set of rules for how these are laid out, maybe by just drawing a few example layouts. And then we should be able to interpolate from that in order to instantiate that space type wherever you've designated it.
Andrew, there's another great question, which is if you were to change the building shape to non-rectangular now, like a random shape, and let it generate, what would happen?
So we can do an example like that here. So if I just decide, actually, first, before I do that, let's just set a few programs. So let's set a private office over here, and let's set like maybe a meeting room over here, and we'll see how we do. Hypar is designed to be as accommodating of those kinds of changes as it can be. There are inevitably going to be scenarios in which it just, things have changed radically enough that it doesn't know how to preserve decisions you've made previously. But if I get in here and like change the shape of this plan, bring out a little leg or something, or, maybe move this up a little bit, it will do its best to recompute. And we might have to, assign a few spaces again. But it's going to try and preserve as much of what you've already introduced into the layout as it can. And so it is designed to be able to handle these sorts of changes. Yeah, so in this case, it didn't hold on to any of my space assignments, but I bet if I had created something maybe a little less extreme, if I had just like, maybe taken just a little leg out here, I bet we would get some of those things back, because in fact, it's holding on to a memory of the intentions that you've expressed. So if you make subtle changes, then the chances are that there are going to be things that are similar. So here now it's reclaimed that private office assignment because there's a space that sort of matches the one that you told it wanted to be private office. Lots of great questions. So there was one about why does a space type have to have associated content? And the answer is it doesn't. You can use space planning zones totally standalone. And in fact, if I just deleted these specific layout functions, then I would just have a kind of high level conceptual space planning tool that didn't do or didn't attempt to do any of this sort of automated furniture layout. So you can use it just at this level. In fact, a number of our customers are using it exactly like that. They just want like diagrams. They don't necessarily want the furniture. And then that's super flexible. If you, load in another program, like let's see if we have a good example, maybe a library or something. Do I have a library program here? Then, I can just work with those space types, not worry about the fact that they're that there isn't an associated set of content, but I can say, okay, lay out the stacks over here, and then I'm going to specify where I want, the children's area to be. So this can just be operating at that kind of Jello cube level of space planning. Other questions? Also open to thoughts and suggestions about what sorts of new functionality you might like to see in order to make this useful for your workflow.
All those questions.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, while those questions are rolling in, we always take pains to remind people that we're showing this in the context of space fitting, for offices, for instance. But we've showed demonstrations in the past. If you go to our YouTube channel and you look at past Hypar Lives, we've talked about the more general problem of space planning for any kind of space. A lot of the things that we're solving here around content ingestion, content visualization, content layout, space type definition, aggregation of space count and area totals, all that stuff works whether you're laying out offices, or it works whether you're laying out a manufacturing facility, it works whether you're laying out retail. So we'd really love to hear from people about what are the kind of specific space layout challenges that they have day to day. We've talked with a number of customers, certainly about test fitting of office spaces, but we've also talked about retail, and we've also talked about things like light industrial. So we'd love to hear from you.
A few more questions have come in here that I'd love to cover. One is about whether we have any ambitions about more technical aspects like airflow, piping, electricity. I love this question. This is the question that Hypar was born to answer. I absolutely want to move in that direction, because Hypar can support systems of, all kinds of scales. And so we've actually already started working on some tools around sort of ceiling layouts and sprinklers that just plug in to an existing HyparSpace workflow. And I think things like piping or HVAC are a no-brainer to start integrating into things like this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay tuned to some future Hypar Lives. We have a team here that's made of architects and former mechanical engineers and people who have worked in structural engineering. So we have designs to make it so that you can move from high-level space planning like jelly cubes, like Andrew was saying, right down to the detailed layout, down to the level of drywall, inside a space, because Hypar is at one level a generic sort of automation platform for any kind of building system at any level of detail. So yeah, stay tuned.
A lot of great questions coming in. There was one about, are we able to access the data in real time, or do we have to download a file of some type? The answer is you don't need to download a file unless you need one. So this is all just on the browser. If you go to this link, it's just like this. It'll save where you are. It'll save all of the settings. It is sort of a real-time tool. And so, there are export formats which you can use to do things like bring into other visualization environments or bring into Revit or to Rhino. But the sort of native state of Hypar is just on the cloud. There should be no files involved unless you absolutely need them. Kristen had another question about taking the data further with cost per square foot information. This is something that we've done in the past with other customers where they've sort of customized this workflow or workflows like this in order to do space planning that has cost information associated. So we can absolutely do this. Right now, HyparSpace sort of out of the box doesn't support this, but it's not hard to do. It's really just math. And so, I guess it's certainly easy to do a sort of overall floor cost per square foot. And it's also possible to associate cost per square foot with each of these space types. So you can get sort of finer grained estimates as you update the layout. Another question about multi-story buildings. So that's a great question. Let's do one. So I'm going to make a little low-rise project here. And I'm going to use, actually, let's give ourselves some context here. So I'm going to grab a location. Let's go to I don't know, Tacoma. Why not? And I'm going to pick a site randomly. If this is your house in Tacoma, I apologize for demolishing it. So we'll give ourselves a little bit of context so that we can scale and just have a little bit of site information. And if I wanted to start to, kind of put a building along 25th Avenue, I can use some of our newer kind of massing tools. And not only can we do sort of multi-story buildings, we can actually use these tools across multiple buildings at once. So if I want to set up a little building over here and maybe another one right next door to it, we'll set up maybe a little skinny thing over here or have something that changes shape a little bit, something like that. Then we can get our kind of super simple masses here. And I can set how many levels I want each of these to have. Maybe this one's 3 stories and maybe this one is 4 stories. And I can, because this is plugged into Hypar, where we already have tools around a lot of kind of other aspects of buildings and not just interior layout, we can start to rely on those tools and plug everything together. So I can drop in some cores here, which are going to depend on there being floors. So we're going to need some floors. So we're going to need some levels. You can see that over here, Hypar provides some guidance about what sorts of information or systems or functions are missing from your workflow in order to connect the dots between the things you're trying to build. So if I drop in space planning tools, then it will be able to kind of associate these levels of this project. And it's actually going to generate like a circulation network for each of these things. Now, you might want to get in there and manipulate it individually. But if I want to get in here and start space planning, I totally can. So I can say, maybe we need some open offices over here. And maybe we're going to need some conference rooms over here. And obviously, you can kind of keep on going and sort of fill out the space plan and get all of your metrics across all of the buildings. So let's do a meeting room maybe over here. And this will even connect all the way down to the automated furniture layout if you want it to. So if I drop in, an open office layout function and a meeting room function, then it will handle those furniture layouts as well if you need like a super detailed view of these projects, although typically we don't recommend that for multiple buildings at once. Lots of questions coming through. So let's see. So we covered multi-story buildings. There was a great question about allowing multiple teams to access and work on the project file simultaneously. And that is also an area of active development currently. Our team is working tirelessly to enable real-time collaboration functionality. So multiple people viewing and even interacting with the workflow at the same time. It's really cool. We can't wait to show it off. Let's see, the regulatory landscape. Is the user responsible for making sure it's legal, or does Hypar do this? Nope, that is your job. I think this is a question we get a lot, and it's a really interesting one. I think we can provide smart tools that help you validate your regulatory compliance, things like, automated checks and things like that. But at the end of the day, it has to be, a certified professional's assessment of some kind of compliance.
Yeah, and to expand on that just a bit, I mean, this is something we get a lot of conversations around, specific to HyparSpace right now. For instance, people want to do things like fire egress calculations and have them automatically notified when your plan doesn't meet with the local fire code. That is, as Andrew said, something where we're not gonna make those distinctions for you, but we will enable you at some point to have a system that you can drop in here that will just highlight for you exactly where you might have an issue with code compliance. We think of those kinds of analysis systems that might run after your generated design. We think of those as very similar to the sort of systems that generate the geometry in the building. You can think of it as just another system that runs on Hypar against your design.
Another question that I really love from Robert Manna, as if we've planned 4 or 5 buildings on a site, but you want to focus on just one, if you want to kind of disaggregate or just get into the detail of one specific level, can we support that? This is also something that a lot of customers are asking us for. We're still figuring out the right interaction mechanism for this. But the short answer is not yet, but it's on the way. We know that this is like a critical requirement for a lot of users. You don't necessarily want to have to see the whole project at once all the time. You want to be able to drill down and view just one level of just one project, get in, fine tune those results, and then kind of pop back out to see the whole project in aggregate. So we're still working on a technical approach for that. It's much more of a user experience or user interface problem than it is a technical problem. I think we can, the platform can handle that, from a sort of scale standpoint, no problem. But figuring out how we expose that in a way that's intuitive is, I think, the challenge ahead of us, but it's something we're actively working on. And yes, and I think, one of the critical things there is like not all of the buildings are going to have the same set of levels. And so in addition to being able to like drill down and look at things, it's also the ability to manipulate and adjust the settings at a per building or per level basis. Not every floor is going to have the same circulation. Not every level is going to be the same height across buildings, things like that. Yeah, other questions or thoughts?
I'm gonna help
Ian.
I'm going to
Yeah,
help
go for it.
Eric out real quick because he noticed, like I do, that sometimes when you respond to the host and panelists. So Zoom, if you're listening, please fix that because I want to respond to everyone all the time.
I totally know how computers work, I swear.
But I'm going to help you out while you're answering the question down below. There was an earlier question about data streaming. And Eric wrote, we don't have built-in connections to Azure DB or PBI, but it's possible. And for those with some technical know-how, it's possible on the platform right now. So in other words, you could write a function right now. If you have a DynamoDB database, if you have blob storage, if you have some sort of Azure database, you could write a function for Hypar right now that talks to that database, uses your own authentication, everything else. As a reminder to everyone, we don't actually see any of your code when you publish things to Hypar. We just get the compiled binaries and run them on the platform. So we've already done this with a couple of customers who maintain their own data sources and wanted to use those in backend Hypar functions. So yes, it's absolutely possible. We don't make it super easy through the interface right now. People have asked us about things like, well, what if I have like an Airtable or a Google Sheet that I want to like connect a function to? That stuff should all be possible in the future as well. So stay tuned. And if you have specific questions about how to connect a specific data source, join us on the Discord server or ping us on social media or whatever, email us and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, and actually, as far as Airtable, that is something we've done, and a few of our customers have done as well. You can already, it's not that hard to spin up a Hypar function that talks to an Airtable database.
We should have an Airtable we should have one out of the box, right?
Yeah.
Like we should just have an Airtable function.
Yeah. There was a question about whether Hypar supports or reads GIS data. Do you want to take that one, Ian?
Yeah, so I don't think we have, I'm trying to figure out how to answer this well. We have functions that deal with GIS data in the form of things like Geojson. So for instance, the location function that Andrew dropped in there, we communicate with Mapbox, which is our third-party map solution provider. So we get information back in Geojson, and developers who are developing functions for Hypar have access to a library of Geojson capability that they can use on the platform. But right now, today, you can't, for instance, grab a large Geojson data set from someplace and drop it onto a function on Hypar and have it render anything for you. So if you have a specific, we have been asked about this, for instance, in terms of like land parcels. Can I just drop in the land parcel set for my city or my municipality, whatever? We've been asked about it, but we're looking for some very specific feedback on a high value targets for that kind of stuff so we could implement it. So again, reach out to us if you have a specific use case in mind.
Well, I think if there are no further questions, I mean, the team can probably hang around for another few minutes, but we'll wrap it up officially here. Thanks to everyone for joining. I hope this was informative. I would say, please try this out. It's everything I've shown you today, except where I highlighted specifically pro features. You can just do this today. You can log on to Hypar, try it out, play around, give us feedback, give us thoughts about how you would want it to change or adjust to work for your needs. We're at a stage where we're super receptive to this kind of feedback, and we're actively prioritizing certain kinds of changes and improvements based on the feedback that we get from you. So it's super important for us to hear from you, and we really value any feedback that we get. So yeah, with that, thanks for joining. The Hypar team will stick around for another few minutes just to answer any last questions.
Yeah, and for those of you who do want to follow up with questions, at the very beginning of the chat on the Zoom, I posted a link to our Discord server, which is where Hypar's community lives and communicates with each other for any questions that they might have about Hypar or cool things that they're building. So feel free to join us over there. The dev team is actively on that thing all day long. So if you drop in and go to want a function or Hypar support, you can talk directly to Andrew or any of our colleagues and get support directly, which is really quite cool. Of course, you can also reach out on social media or any of the forums where you see us out in the public. Feel free to just drop us a question.
There was a request for the Discord link. I'll put that up as well. Yeah, please do join us on Discord. It's great fun. And it's not all platform related either. There are cool discussions happening about what automation means for the future of architecture and cool ML experiments and all kinds of great stuff.
And Andrew, it seems that you have also coined the term Hypar Labs during this call, and several on the team on our internal Slack have already said that is definitely going to be a thing. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's going to be a thing because it's too cool a name to pass up.
Cool, love it. Chang Joe says he's already in Hypar Labs. Love it. That's great.